Should you get an epidural? Short answer, yes, if you don't want to deal with the pains of labor and you're okay with the idea of laboring on your back, while also being more prepared for an emergency C-section. And on the other hand, no, if you want the freedom to be able to move around during labor and if you're worried about the small chance that the epidural would be administered incorrectly, or that it could cause a myriad of other cascade interventions, or maybe you just want to prove that you can have your baby without an epidural. Welcome to the Deconta channel, where we discuss all things educational and we never duck away from difficult topics, including everything you need to know about the epidural from a non-judgmental scientific standpoint. Let's start with how the epidural works and then move on to the pros and cons of getting one so that you can make the most informed decision that's best fit for you. As you probably already know, the epidural uses medication injected near your spinal cord, but just to clarify, it's not injected into your spinal cord in order to numb you from the waist all the way down to your feet. According to the National Center for Health Statistics, epidurals are given in over 60% of hospital deliveries for pain relief. So it's a pretty common practice to use an epidural. And typically, the anesthesiologist will leave a flexible tube in place called a catheter right next to your spinal cord in case they need to administer some more medication if the labor ends up going longer than anticipated. You'll have to stay still with your back arched for about 10 to 15 minutes while they get the epidural into place, and then it'll take about 20 minutes until the medication really kicks into full effect. If it's done correctly, the epidural will go into the membrane surrounding your spinal cord, but not into the spinal fluid and not into the cord itself. Imagine that your brain and your spinal cord are surrounded by a bag of fluid. The bag is called the dura, and the fluid is called the cerebrospinal fluid. The epidural needle should inject the anesthetic just outside the dura bag. However, if that process is done incorrectly, that leads us to our first con on our list. Con number 1. The wet tap or the post-dural puncture headache. If the needle happens to accidentally puncture the dura bag, then you'll create a very small hole in the bag, causing the cerebrospinal fluid to leak out. And this leakage is what causes a wet tap or a post-dural puncture headache. It is often described as a horrible migraine that gets worse if you sit down or stand up, but can be alleviated when you lay down flat. And just like a migraine, it might come with neck pain, sickness, and a general dislike of bright lights. But the good news is that it can often just be treated with painkillers until the hole heals up on its own. Or if it happens to be severe enough, then something called a blood patch will be required in order to help you get back to normal more quickly. But oftentimes they would take care of that before you're discharged from the hospital with your baby. The risk of getting this kind of headache is about 1 in 100, so a mere 1%. While the risk of getting such a headache from an epidural is, well, a headache to deal with, the good news is that they mostly heal on their own pretty quickly, and long-term issues related to that are extremely rare. Con number 2 is the lack of mobility. This is a con that everyone will be able to relate to. With an epidural in place, you won't be able to feel the lower half of your body, so you won't be able to get up and walk around or squat, unless that is you opt for a walking epidural. Otherwise, you can pretty much just count yourself as being isolated to the bed. With the use of an epidural, you'll need to have your blood pressure, in case it drops, your oxygen levels, and your pulse closely monitored, along with having an IV in place and possibly a catheter in place to catch any pee, and having stretchy bands across your belly so that they can monitor your baby continuously throughout the process and make sure that everything's a-okay with them. So with an epidural comes a lot of other gizmos and things that you're hooked up to, making it kind of feel like you're trapped amongst it all. Personally, I didn't mind being hooked up to all the different wires and straps and what have you because it actually helped my anxiety and it gave me the assurances that everything was being monitored and baby and myself were okay through the process. So even though it took away my ease of mobility, the anxiety being down was actually a much bigger benefit for me personally. However, I can imagine how awful it would have been if the epidural would have only worked partially, say only numbing half of my body, and then I still would have all those gizmos hooked up to me and I wouldn't be able to move around. I can imagine that that would be pretty hard to deal with. Con number 3 is prolonged labor. Since the epidural numbs the nerves and the muscles of the lower body, it seems like it may be harder for the laboring woman to know when and how hard she needs to push, which would, hypothetically, increase the labor time. With possible increased labor time, there's also a greater risk of needing to use a vacuum or forceps or even having an emergency C-section done to get baby out. Although, as a side note here, the risk of getting the emergency C-section increases to only 3.5 from 2.4, so only a 1.1% difference between the mamas that get the epidural versus those who don't. My overall counter-argument to this specific con comes from my own personal experience. If your body and mind are already too stressed out and exhausted and tensed up, then you're going to prolong labor either way, except in one scenario, you're writhing in grueling pain, and in the other, you get a break from the pain to catch a breath or maybe a few minutes of sleep so that you can really be prepared for the end stages, the active stages of pushing your baby out. For me personally, I was stagnant around 6 centimeters for a writhing 4 hours, and I just couldn't loosen up. But then after I got the epidural, I progressed from 7 to 10 centimeters and had my baby in my arms all within less than 2 hours. Simply because I was finally able to relax and let my body take over the work for it instead of trying to overthink it all with my head. I was also still able to feel and recognize the pressure from a contraction, even though I didn't have the pain, so I still knew when I should push. And thus, the epidural, for me at least, did not interfere with my pushing. Con number 4 is that the mom may develop a fever after getting the epidural, which means that antibiotics would need to be administered. This is a causal relationship in where we think that the epidural is causing the mother to develop this fever, i.e. a temperature greater than 100.4 degrees Fahrenheit. The reason that the fever may develop is still unknown, but it's hypothesized that getting the epidural blocks the nerves, therefore causing you to sweat less and make you hotter. The fever has a very low incidence rate overall, but if you are a first-time mom, your chances are between 11 and 33% of developing this fever. So if you do end up developing a fever during labor, the doctors won't know if it's a legit infection going on or if it's caused by the epidural. So they'll treat it worst case scenario, like it is an infection, and they'll give you antibiotics. Con number 5 is maternal back pain and or nerve damage. Now, you may have heard some horror stories from other moms about their epidural not getting placed right, causing some permanent back pain or permanent nerve damage that they have to deal with forever now. But rest assured, while things like back pain temporarily and nerve damage or even paralysis are possible, so is getting struck by lightning. In other words, they are such rare occurrences that it's not even worth discussing in this video. Even for someone like me who has anxiety about just about everything, the concern about some kind of permanent damage occurring from the epidural isn't even remotely on my radar. Now let's move on to the positive pros of getting the epidural. Pro number 1 is that there's no harm to your baby. I feel like the largest pro within this category is that there is no scientific evidence of undue harm caused by the epidural to your baby. Babies are no more likely to spend more time in the NICU, no more likely to have fetal distress, and no more likely to have low APGAR scores, meaning that they're not more likely to be lethargic after having an epidural that the mom got. There is also no affirmative scientific evidence suggesting that nursing is negatively impacted after the use of an epidural. Pro number 2, obviously, is pain relief. The next biggest pro is the fact that the mama, the birthing person, gets a breath of relief from the pain through this grueling process. Childbirth is no joke, guys. I mean, it even pushes the strongest Louises out there to the brink of breakage. Having that pain relief to catch your breath and regain your energy after already laboring between 12 to 20 hours is a huge benefit of the epidural. I mean, can you imagine working out for 20 hours straight and then being asked to do the hardest set of all time for another hour after that without having any rest or breaks in between? You'd be pretty exhausted by the time you'd have to do that final set. And that is where the epidural really shines, in giving you that break for the final set. Pro number 3 is that the epidural prepares you for the event of an emergency. This is a purely tactical pro if we assume and prepare for the worst. So if you did have to get an unplanned emergency C-section, it would be better for you to have that epidural already in place, ready to go, rather than you getting knocked out fully from anesthesia, or going fully under, if you will, which causes even more danger to your baby. Plus, you won't even get to experience the birth if you're fully under an anesthetic. Pro number 4 is the ability to interact. This fourth and final pro is that you get to have this pain relief without the side effect of drowsiness, as is the case with many other of the painkillers used throughout labor, meaning that it offers you the unique ability to interact and spend some time with your partner through the process in a more calm and relaxed atmosphere. Take this with a grain of salt, but if you already know that you're like me, i.e. you tense up uncontrollably when you're stressed out, you overthink everything, and you have anxiety, then at least keep the idea of getting an epidural open in your mind, in case you do decide you want it when you're in the moment. But I also recommend trying to make it to at least 6 centimeters dilated before you get it. This way, you'll have hypothetically progressed far enough into labor to where you shouldn't have to worry about the epidural slowing down your labor by too far. You'll have that pain relief without the drowsiness as a side effect in order to kind of help you through the worst parts of the dilation from 8 to 10 centimeters. You'll have the backup ready to go in case you do need an emergency C-section, which should also hopefully help lessen your anxiety about it. And you'll have the ability to relax a little bit with the pain relief and let your body take over instead of your head overthinking everything through the process. Well, now that you know everything about the epidural, here's a summary of what week 35 of pregnancy felt like.
I literally keep dropping stuff and it's driving me insane. Not just because I drop it and I potentially break it, but because I have to bend over this to then pick up the item I dropped.
When I say she favors the right side, I mean, she really favors the right side. Look at how squishy it is over here. There is no baby over here. All of baby is right here. All on the right side. As usual.
She was moving all afternoon, but, you know, just because she's not moving right now, hello anxiety! Oh my goodness, are you okay in there, my little girl? Yes, thank you for trying to pacify my anxiety. It's not working. Still so much anxiety.
Yeah, that's some lovely swelling right there. That's what I'm talking about. Oh yeah. Look at that edema. Lovely swelling.
It breaks my heart that my daughter has to stay inside and watch the neighbor kids play across the street just because I don't want her to get COVID before I go into labor, and then if I get COVID, then I would have Alice separated from me, and that's a nightmare in itself, and my poor baby girl has to suffer because of it. The first thing my baby girl does when she wakes up is love on her stuffed pankies. They're her favorite. And today she started pretending like they were flying. Oh, she kisses them. It's so cute. Look at how cute she is. She just stares at it all adoringly. Oh, I can't. Oh, another kiss.
It doesn't get any cuter than that. Oh my gosh.
The clock is ticking for our little one's arrival. And just what are they up to in there at this point? Our baby is mainly continuing to grow, and they're likely between 17 and 18 inches now, or 43.2 to 45.7 centimeters long, which is roughly the length of this baguette as seen in the model here. They should also weigh somewhere in the range of 5.5 to 6 pounds by now. The majority of our baby's growth is done by this week. For example, our little one's kidneys are fully developed and their liver is also starting to process waste. You're likely feeling a bit crammed with the growth of your little one taking up all of your abdominal space. So you may notice a difference in their movements with less space to move around in, but you should still be feeling their movements nonetheless. Be sure to keep track at least once each day where you count 10 movements within a 2-hour period. And of course, if you're ever concerned, just go to labor and delivery. Seriously, just go. It's better to be safe than sorry. In terms of getting an epidural, what's right for one woman might not be right for you. So be sure to weigh all of these pros and cons and facts for yourself so that you can decide what's right for your body, your mind, and your baby. How about you? Are you thinking about going unmedicated or medicated through the labor process? Let me know in the comments below. These videos take quite a bit of time, but it would only cost you 1 second to like this one. And to join me next week in this 40-week pregnancy series that follows me all the way through my pregnancy to the birth, all you have to do is subscribe. And remember to be kind and don't judge another woman based off of her decision as to whether or not she's going to have a medicated or an unmedicated labor. Neither side is better than the other. Both result in a happy, healthy baby. Thank you for watching, and see you next week.